Good afternoon and welcome to our 20th annual exhibition of hydrogen and fuel cells and batteries. We've been here for quite some time talking about these technologies and the important role they'll play in the future. Of course, this is not simply a German exhibit. It's an international exhibit with a strong presence of European technologies and companies. And to discuss the European perspective with more focus, we have two experts in the field. I'll be talking to Bert de Colvenaer, who's Executive Director, and Bernard Frois, who is Chair of the States of Representative Group, both at the the Fuel Cells and Hydrogen Joint Undertaking. Please welcome with me Bert de Colvenaer and Bernard Frois. So what we need, of course, it's a wonderful name, Fuel Cells and Hydrogen Joint Undertaking, but we need to instantly know, of course, what that is, what it represents, and what you do. Could we start with you, Bert?
Yes, I'm happy to explain a little about the Fuel Cells and Hydrogen Joint Undertaking. In very simple terms, the Fuel Cell Hydrogen Joint Undertaking is a public-private partnership, a joint venture between, on one side, the European Commission, and on the other side, the European industry and research community. So it's a public-private partnership where the main mission is actually to assure that the fuel cell hydrogen technology is getting commercially ready by 2015. And to do so, we have financial resources which we get from European Commission and a complementary investment from the industry and research to fund projects. Again, in simple terms, we are the European funding agency for fuel cells and hydrogen. And I assume that many amongst you actually have left or right some part of funding through some of our projects which have been won.
And Bernard, you are involved directly with the member states. So is your mission the coordinating of the various national bodies into a European group? How do you do your work?
Well, it's not a coordinating group. It's an advisory body where we actually, you can guess that member states want to see how their money is spent. And so their first mission is to send people that are linked to governments and who are exchanging information from governments to the FCH JU and from the FCH JU to government. It's a link organization, but it's an important one because that's where the information, it's a platform of exchanges with 28 countries.
And if you allow me to complement, the joint undertaking is basically gathering European Commission, industry and research community. But the most important word in the name is the joint. So I believe also part of our mission is to assure that Europe as a whole, the 28 member states, find a platform to work together. And that's why the role of the State Representative Group is such an importance to try to have this interaction with the individual member states.
Now, when we were preparing for this talk, I found one interesting point was you said we're not a policy organization, we're a funding organization. This is important because, of course, if you live in Europe as long as I have, you hear the word European community and you think there's somebody creating a policy and we'll all have to accept it. You take a proactive approach and you allow the policy to come from where? From the needs of the technology, that is, the funding is based on viability, based on how do you base who gets the funding where?
The program, the activity program, comes basically out of the public-private partnership I described. It is an industry-led public-private partnership. And the European Commission strongly believes that in order to bring growth, prosperity in Europe, the industry is most likely the strongest candidate to define which way to go forward. So that's basically where it all starts, public-private partnership, Commission bringing the money, the research and demonstration agenda is being put forward by the industrial and research participants. They have the long-term view, they have a good perception about technology viability, market opportunities, and they are helping, of course, in close relation with the directions, the high-level directions at the European level, on how to go forward, which technologies, which demonstrations should take off.
although hydrogen and fuel cells, the technology has been around for some time, it is of course continuously improving. Applications are getting broader and broader or more specific. There's niche markets, there's potential large-scale markets. But behind all this, we have an issue of regulations and standards. So do the individual member countries actually do a good job of their own regulations, or do we need European standards? For example, if we develop an automobile, is there a larger potential success story if we do a certain type of standardized, let's say, fueling station in one country and maybe another country takes another route? Or do people try to cooperate here towards common regulations? And do you play a role in this decision-making process?
Well, I can tell you that it's always a tricky problem because each country wants to have somehow its specific regulation because each country thinks its regulations are better. Okay. Fortunately, I think there is Europe and there are directives. And directives help because then they're implemented in every country. But just for the amusement, one had the situation in France last year where German cars running with hydrogen were allowed to go anywhere, but no French car could do that. You see, because you needed a special regulation. So I think that one has to realize that whenever there is a new technology, everybody is a little bit cautious, and it's clear that Germany, being ahead, had the best regulation to be implemented as a starter. But then Europe will come with its own way of harmonizing everything, and Europe is very useful from that point of view.
If you allow me to compliment, I think the regulations are of crucial importance. It is important at a European level, but I also believe it's very necessary at an international level, meaning that the regulations and codes has to be harmonized between Europe, America, Japan, Korea, and all the other, how to say, participating, interested countries, because what we are developing here is a technology related to energy storage, energy conversion. And that issue on energy storage and conversion is, of course, an important aspect in Europe, but actually worldwide. And you see that many of these players are global players. Talking about automotive industry, for instance, I mean, they're not selling only cars for specifically European market or specifically Japanese or Korean market. They want to be able to sell the cars worldwide and have the same car sold worldwide. So that's why an international standardization on, of course, cars, but equally important for buses, for hydrogen refilling stations, for stationary applications, is of crucial importance. And that's part of our activities, our mandate, our projects, are trying to identify what are the gaps, what are the differences, and how can we steadily, and sometimes research activities or pre-normative research needs to happen, is try to close the gap towards a worldwide common regulations. It's easy said, but it's not so easy done, because of course politics come into the game, and if you see how the different industrial players, companies, try to push their own standards, their own know-how forward, it's not straightforward. Yeah.
But I would add to that it's really an important problem for practicalities. For example, if you have a car and you're driving your car through Europe, you want to have the possibility of filling your car with not 10 adaptators, you know. So there is a coherence which is very well needed all over the world. So Bert told you that, of course, because when you're changing countries, you know, these days when you rent a car, you want it to be the same thing as what you have anywhere. Supposing that you had the wheel like that, here, you realize, and that's not easy because the best one is, of course, someone who wants to sell his technology to the others. So there, you can imagine there are a lot of discussions. And where the FCH JU is important, it represents in Europe the platform where these things are discussed.
I can imagine there's really points where you almost need legislative support. To give you one example, if we go back just a few years, everyone's mobile phones seem to have a different charger. And this was wonderful for people selling replacement parts. You'd have to go back and spend 30 euros. And at some point, the waste of this whole process became so obvious, and also the detriment to the consumer budget. And at some point, they simply decided, no, this is not the way we want to go. Manufacturers are getting out of line here, but it's simply a waste issue as well. So now we have the legislative background to say, let's have one charger technology and save the consumer money and save the waste. Is there a point where legislative activity, I mean, regulations are to some extent decisions of governmental bodies to say this is approved or this isn't. I'm not sure if it's the government that does that, or, but the regulations themselves, do we need more regulatory support along this nature? You talked about mobility issues and refueling your car. Is there enough support within the European community for your organization to say, look, guys, we have to unite on this issue? Is it easy to do?
It's not easy to do, and yes, we do need this on regulations, codes and standards, and like Bernard was referring, if we talk about battery electric vehicles, you know the debate we had a couple of years ago, which plug we're going to use. And then finally somebody has to stand up and saying, this is going to be the technology we're going to use in Europe. So some kind of strength, some kind of maturity is really necessary. Now, we all know that we're working on a technology which is young. And there has to be an appropriate timing, not too late, not too early, when this kind of standardization happens. When somebody says, well, we all know within the community that now is the right moment to standardize on, for instance, hydrogen purity or impurities, how much hydrogen can be allowed. Because we know that there are different methods to produce hydrogen and they are not 100% pure hydrogen. So this is one example. Now, the same kind of legislation, policy support is necessary also to introduce this technology towards the market. Because what we have seen is that for a long time, we, as the fuel cell hydrogen community, have been pushing the technology, saying that what we're doing is great and superb and so on and so forth. We need to move a little towards pulling. And the policy can, for instance, support in this to give specific benefits on when you have a clean car that you have or exempted from some specific regulations. I mean, we had in Brussels 2-3 weeks ago a smog alarm. There was too high pollution and the cars were not allowed to drive very quickly. Now, everybody was supposed to drive not faster than 90 kilometers an hour. Now, that's good because the smog level goes down. But it could well be that policy support says that all the cars who have a petrol diesel engine have to drive 90, but the clean technologies doesn't really matter because they don't have any pollution. So you see what kind of triggering effects policy legislation can give. The same, for instance, on driving on the bus lane. I mean, in some Norwegian, Scandinavian countries, there is a clear benefit when you have a zero-emission car, battery fuel cells, you can use the bus lane. Now, we know that the car is still rather expensive, but time you cannot buy. And if you can save 45 minutes to go from your house to work by using the bus lane, you might well be happy to invest a little more money to take this specific advantage. So policy is of crucial importance.
On that level, we have examples. My brother's in California, and already right now, if you have a hybrid car, you get to use an extra lane, which is almost never crowded, which saves him about 45 minutes per day on the way to and from work. This is a fundamental game changer for him if you have kids and a long working day. For him, of course, it's a cost initially, but it's something that has happened, this ability to spend a little more money to invest in a developing technology and to reap the rewards is basically defined by the fact that there is a law. Similar things seem to be in the works already if we look at London. There are ozone alarms and there are levels of pollution already in Berlin several days per year in the summer where factually, according to European restrictions, there should be no diesel cars on the road. So where are the hot spots where this technology is going to be applied? Do you see a market for delivery vehicles, for consumer vehicles? How is that going to play into the development in the next few years?
It depends on the countries, but basically today people are converging on a few models. Model number one is to have stations, as many as one can buy, and then to industrialize really the production of these vehicles, because these vehicles today are, I wouldn't say handmade, but they are not really mass produced. So when you're talking about enormous advantages, you're talking about a future which is not immediate. I think today the real problem is how to convince people that this is a car that exists, which is as good, as simple as any other car. For example, these cars are easy to drive, and people that have them in California, we took the example, Honda has been leasing them for a fixed amount, and in some sense you're talking about a captive fleet, because it's a fleet around one station and people come back, and these people love the car. So it's the availability of the car and the filling station, the joint thing, which will depend on the model. And I think that in Germany, in the UK and in France now, there are very strong plans that are depending really on the cities. But for example, the city of Hamburg and the city of London have very concrete plans because they want to fight really the pollution. One has to watch, because promises are sometimes overwhelming. You set the proper stage by saying that diesel is the problem. Okay, that means that, for example, in France, La Poste, the mailing system, is saying in 20 years I don't want any diesel car, I just want green car, and they're ready to switch. And they have a problem because they have battery vehicles and the range is not enough. So they want to go to hydrogen. So it will depend on the people, on the cities, but basically we see everywhere a strong change this year. It's clear that now people are convinced hydrogen, it's not something which is a fiction. It's just, when is hydrogen?
On that note, perhaps we should mention the Horizon 2020 program, because there's always a danger of talking about applications right now without mentioning that the future is determined by the availability of the resources, the nature of how much clean air is left, CO2 emissions, and how that all combines environmentally. So the Horizon 2020 program, could you describe that, Bert?
For us, the Horizon 2020 program is basically the second phase of the Joint Technology Initiative. It's the multi-annual financial framework from the European Commission, which they invest in innovation. The total amount is about 70 billion, and the fuel cells and hydrogen joint undertaking will get about 700 million from that over the next 7 years, from 2014 to 2020. So this is basically the ring-fenced budget Europe will invest over the next 7 years, complemented with an equal amount of investment from the industrial partners. So in totality, we talk about about 1.4 billion euro to invest in the technology. Now, what are we going to do with that money? In very simple terms, we're going to continue what we were doing. We want to make the technology, fuel cells and hydrogen, more reliable, cheaper and more efficient. That's very simple, to improve the technology in maturity. Two other things which we will have to address is first of all the integration of renewable energy sources, solar, wind, hydro, into the energy system using electrolyzers. And you might see also here, without making too much publicity, that electrolyzers is something which found more and more grip, more and more interest. Because it's one of the key cornerstones to integrate all the electricity and the intermittence from the renewable electricity into the electricity grid, allowing some buffering. Storage, energy storage, using hydrogen, is the fourth important theme we have to work on. And the last one is try to reduce the critical raw materials, the rare earth metals, which we know are all necessary to have the catalytic effect within the fuel cells. And we need to try to find ways to overcome the expensive type of materials. So in very simple terms, we carry on. We have a ring-fence budget for the next 7 years, so the community can be assured that this is the way forward.
Okay. I enjoy every year having conversations with you people because we can deal with issues without being based simply in a national format. If it's a local business, we have different issues. If it's a particular technology, we can go to the larger philosophical context. And I really enjoy this because if you're a fan of True Supertramp, you might think of this song, Crisis, What Crisis? We do have an energy issue. We have issues of sustainability, security, and self-reliance. And we did not need Putin to tell us that there may be, in fact, some dramatic changes in the energy mix approaching Europeans' central powers just due to the nature of where we get our energy from. Energy self-reliance is something we have not achieved. Fossil fuels are limited. And it's a question of what you want to do with what remains. So this is a dramatic issue. I do want to open this discussion to everyone in the audience here, but if we could start with the simple question of renewable resources. And the reason I find this so important, not only for Germany, is the potential of these renewable resources is massive. We've all heard about the wind turbines in the north of Germany and how much they can produce. But it seems to me right now many are convinced, oh, what a headache, we don't know where to go with this energy. The storage is a problem, the transportation is a problem. So although we have solutions to this energy dependency, it seems as if we're not exactly implementing quickly enough, as if we may be risking our energy security if we don't respond. So what is your take on this? Are you satisfied? Are you happy? Do you feel comfortable with the energy mix that you get today? Do you feel that it's stable? I'm nervous. Are you?
Well, we're very nervous, especially with the Ukraine problem. People realize that, in some sense, we are in a fragile system, you know. I think that the people who are managing networks are very worried because very often we're near a crash, okay? So in some sense, we all love our system. You see, it's beautiful. It's a wonderful system. If you have gas heating, you're happy. I think we're happy today. The question is we want our children to be happy tomorrow. This is the issue. Because in some sense, tomorrow is built today. It's a little bit hard to understand that, but when you buy your car, it's already an old car, an old design. You know, things are in some sense of the past. Any setup, you know, when you go here, you can see that the future is really the future, but it's being built now. So what is important is that the energy system is going to be totally different, because France is a good example. You had major utilities, and these utilities have been put into competition. So, for example, the one that was selling gas is selling now also electricity. The one selling electricity is also selling gas. But their problem is that they will have competition from other sources. And so the panorama in 10 years in electricity is going to be different. And, you know, a situation where you had essentially a fixed system like the Russian system. Russia was very happy 2 years ago. no problem. We sell gas to Europe, Germany, France, wonderful. When you're in Russia, you're going to question yourself, how am I going to do that? Because we see our problem, and I want you just to face the Russian problem. They don't know whether people will be happy to pay the same thing for gas. And everybody try to escape from constraints. And the problem is electricity can be decentralized. And it's a headache because the large utility companies are not terribly happy to manage systems today that are very difficult for them. They have not been built for that. So it's a transition period, but there is no way to come back. It's only in the future. And hydrogen has a role to play, which is not really 100% sure, but it's one of the avenues that seem to please a lot of people, especially, as Bert says, with electrolyzer, power to gas, storage. Hydrogen is there.
Would you like to continue on that?
Well, I'm very much the same opinion, and to maybe even a little more blunt, I believe that mankind is of nature being very lazy. As long as the system works, people are not intending to change something. Business as usual is the easiest way forward. And what we have seen over the last about 200 years, the fossil fuels we have been keeping on using, because what I always say, energy is not a problem, it's energy storage. And basically Earth has provided us with a superb system of energy storage as all the fossil fuels. And we know we're going to run out sooner or later. So with whatever is left on fossil fuels, I believe we should use in a smarter way than just burn it and give us an environmental headache. Because fossil fuels are at the same time the natural resources for making synthetic materials and plastics. And again, as what Bernard was saying, hydrogen and fuel cells are a cornerstone in storing and converting energy. Storage of energy is really what mankind should get to terms with. Energy, there is enough, because 8 days of sunshine is enough energy for having the full need of energy for the whole year, for the whole Earth. So it's trying to find a way how we can capture all that energy and store it for the moment we actually going to use it.
I add again, if there's questions from the audience, just raise your hand and we'll address them. Oh, 2 questions? Sorry. I'll come to you directly.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for a very good conversation. My question is that Germany has taken an initiative to stop using nuclear energy. When Europe or some other countries will take initiative to stop using fossil fuels, which can accelerate usage of hydrogen, for example? Thank you.
Want to understand?
If you allow me quickly to answer, a clear example of this kind of national vision is Denmark. Denmark has the vision, the national vision, that by 2050 they would like, or they want to become fossil fuel import independent. No longer import of fossil fuels for the whole sector. This is a clear example that having a national vision, the whole industry could align and saying this is what we want to realize. Because at European level, we spend every day 1 billion euro to import fossil fuels. Times 365 is 1/3 of a trillion euros we spend. It's a huge amount of money. Why don't we use that part of the money to reinvest in systems and technologies to become self-reliant, fossil fuel independent?
Well,
Any other questions there?
I could add something to this answer. When you're talking about nuclear, fossil, etc., you have to see, for example, that every country is different. Because, for example, China is building 2 nuclear power plants a year. Okay, so there, at least China will build probably 40 nuclear power plants, and will build also when they need it hydrogen. So we're talking more about a mix, and the good news is that people are investing in Europe. I would say significant amount of money, because we didn't talk about money, but money is really, incentive money is there. In Europe, we're talking about something like 1.3 billion over 7 years. Germany is doing something about of the same order. UK is going to put 500 million to deploy relay stations. So in some sense, I think that what is granted is hydrogen will be part of a mix, okay? And car will play an important role there, because you can do things with hydrogen you can't do with any other car. What you can do with hydrogen is that you're not going to use nuclear electricity, for example. You're going really to use it with renewables. So it will be part of the energy system. And I think we'll talk about cars next, so I don't want to enter in the topic. But what is clear is that it's a new energy system that will be slowly coming. And if you go to Siemens, for example, in the pavilion number 9, okay, you will be astounded. Siemens has the same plan as Denmark, really, in terms of vision. So, since it's a vision, it's ambiguous. Will it be like that? But in Denmark, surely. In Germany, we don't know. In France, we don't know. But the vision is there. That's where we want to go today.
The vision is clear. CO2 zero would be everyone's favorite project, but I always sense a slight danger in reducing the flexibility of what we all do with hydrogen and fuel cells to this notion that it's going to be pure hydrogen alone and the PEM cell. Why is this important? Because even though we still use combustible materials, the classic example is natural gas. Again and again on stage here, I've heard that if we use it more effectively with fuel cell technology, because we're getting more energy out of the existing and already used natural gas, we reduce CO2 emissions by, and the figures are anywhere from 30 to potentially 50%. That is, most people heat their apartments with that Gasetagenheizung, as the Germans call it. And instead of having a boiler, if you replace that with a fuel cell, you are more effectively using that energy. And there is even, and this is an important point, it even pays off. That is, this is not a big investment and wait and see. This is not the rich guy who wants to take the fast lane in the highway. This is for every potential customer of energy. Okay? Now, on that note, though, I have to ask myself, why is there not more awareness? Because just about everyone has a boiler in their apartment. And in fact, if you look at the statistics in Germany, many of these boilers are old and out of date and ineffective. So are you surprised that the implementation of existing technology is taking so long?
Well, if you want, I can give you a brief answer about that. I'm living in an apartment, and it's an apartment building. And whatever we want to change, there are only 64 apartments. It takes 10 years to open the discussion. Okay? So to convince people to pay when they have invested, it's very difficult on a human basis, and it reflects that on governments, because these problems have been dealt, and that's where government incentives are important, because they give the flexibility for people to go a little bit quicker in this domain. And this is why the FCH JU is important, because it's an acceleration process for introducing hydrogen and explaining demonstration examples that really are successful.
What I would like to complement on that is that in order to bring some new kind of technology into people's daily life, you need to change people's mentality. And that takes time. That takes times of generation. I mean, I think everybody recognizes that whatever they've been educated with by their parents, that's still something they carry forward to their children. In order to change from one to another, in order to change from something which is very convenient and very practical and useful, burning the fossil fuel, to something which is new, the hydrogen fuel cell combinations for cars or for boilers or similar kind of technology. This kind of change requires people to start, thinking in a more different way. Now, clearly, what we have been doing in the past, and I said it before, is pushing the technology. Now, what we need to address from now, because we see in the exhibition down here about everywhere, is that the products getting market ready. Now, the key question we will have to ask from today, who is going to be the customer? Who is going to be the customer who wants to buy a fuel cell, whether stationary, whether in a car, whether in a bus? What is the key advantage for that? Now, we have discussed that before. If you would be able to drive your vehicle on an empty lane straight into the city, people would love this kind of things. That I can buy, with buying a different car every day, 45 minutes. And it's a very similar kind of concept which we need to identify for buses. What is the key advantage for buses? And we come back to the example of London. London will say shortly, we are so congested and we are so polluted in the middle of the city that we only will allow clean vehicles. The customer is the city community, and actually all the people living there say we want to clean up. They want to clean up. So it's a clear necessity at the moment to identify the key advantages of the fuel cell hydrogen combination in each application towards a customer-oriented perspective. That customer starts to get more and more interested.
Do we have any questions from the audience? We're almost out of time here, and I'm sure we've left a dozen topics out. But perhaps briefly, if we can talk about the phases. This is an unfair question because it's a very complicated process. But if you would use the vision you have from surveying the European context, what are the stages? Are we going to have large applications, stationary? Is it the heating in our homes that's going to change first? The mobility, I should say, that changes first? Is it going to be the storage capacity of the grid that makes the big entryway visible for fuel cell technology? We have two gentlemen on the stage. Your guess, Bert?
Well, I think that the bet is that really the cars, the vehicles, because we talked about cars, but you have also commercial light vehicles, because to enter in cities, for example, you need the truck problem is there. Okay, don't forget you must bring food, and if in the present system, vehicles will be pressing need. Okay, so I guess this is first, but I think that apart from that, the efforts are all done in parallel. But I would bet that the cars will be first, because for the rest, it will take a little longer time. The automobile industry is really ready to go. We're talking about next year deployment.
Yeah.
I would think that, complementing to what Bernard just said, and I do agree that the automotive is basically the driving force between the technology, is that I believe that all around in Europe and even worldwide, you will have geographical differences. There will be locations where the car are going to find grip quicker. There will be locations also where storage is going to be more important. And I can imagine around the North Sea, for instance, where there is a lot of wind, that this is a prime target and say we have so much wind, we want to find a way to store it, so let's work on storage. Okay, storage can then be having a spillover effect using that hydrogen into the cars. Okay, but that's the complicated and the very horizontal advantages. There might be also situations where backup power are key. Maybe not necessarily in Europe, but we know that in other regions of the world, the stability of the electricity grid is rather poor. And there, if you would have decentralized electricity production, spreading out the risk, you create immediately a much more stable situation. So I think personally that yes, cars are going to be, how to say, the leader, and then you will see geographical difference based on specific needs in every area.
Well, we've run out of time, but the conversation should be continued at booth C56. It's this direction there. I have been talking to my favorites at the fair here, Bert de Colvenaer, Executive Director, and Bernard Frois, Chair of the States Representative Group, both at the Fuel Cells and Hydrogen Joint Undertaking. Yes?
And I would like to compliment that the discussion will carry on, and specifically this evening at about 5 o'clock, we invite everybody who is around for a small drink and cocktail at our booth, where there's something to drink and something to eat.
No, that sounds like a hydrogen-based substance there already. It's cocktail hour. Okay, so back here at 5, we're looking forward to that. Until that time, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure talking to both of you again.
Pleasure's ours. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernard. Yeah.